Hi, boys and girls. I know it's been a while. I'm out in my backyard. I got to see a lot of you today, which was really fun. I want to read another chapter of The Magician's Nephew. But it's been so long, I feel like we need to back up a little bit and see what had happened last. Chapter 4 was called The Bell and the Hammer. Remember, they had gone into this funny world with statues, but they had real clothes on, really fine clothes, and I asked you to use your imagination to picture what you were seeing. And I'm going to back up and read the end of chapter 13 for you. Not chapter 13, chapter 4 for you, so we can get our heads back in the story. Where do I want to start? As soon as the bell was struck, it gave out a note, a sweet note such as you might have expected, and not very loud. But instead of dying away again, it went on, and as it went on, it grew louder. Before a minute had passed, it was twice as loud as it had been to begin with. It was soon so loud that if the children had tried to speak, but they weren't thinking of speaking now, they were just standing with their mouths open, they would not have heard one another. Very soon it was so loud that they could not have heard one another even if they were shouting. And still it grew, all on one note, a continuous sweet sound, though the sweetness had something horrible about it. Till the air in the great room was throbbing with it, and they could feel the stone floor trembling under their feet. Then at last it began to be mixed with another sound, a vague, disastrous noise which sounded first like the roar of a distant train, and then like the crash of a falling tree. They heard something like great weights falling. Finally, with a sudden rush and thunder and a shake that nearly flung them off their feet, about a quarter of the roof at one end of the room fell in. Great blocks of masonry, that's the cement, fell all around them, and the walls rocked. The noise of the bell stopped. Clouds of dust cleared away. Everything became quiet again. It was never found out whether the fall of the roof was due to magic, or whether that unbearably loud sound from the bell just happened to strike the note, which was more than those crumbling walls could stand. "There, I hope you're satisfied now," panted Polly. "Oh, well, it's all over anyway," said Diggory. And both thought it was, but they had never been more mistaken in their lives. Da-da-dun. Are you with me in the story? The roof has fallen. There was a loud noise, and then the roof fell, and now it's silent. The next chapter is chapter 5, The Deplorable Word. The children were facing one another across the pillar where the bell hung, still trembling, though it no longer gave out any note. Suddenly, they heard a soft noise from the end of the room, which was still undamaged. They turned quick as lightning to see what it was. One of the robed figures, the farthest off one of all, the woman whom Diggory thought so beautiful, was rising from her chair. When she stood up, they realized she was even taller than they thought. And you could see at once, not only from her crown and robes, but from the flash of her eyes and the curve of her lips, that she was a great queen. She looked around the room and saw the damage and saw the children, but you could not guess from her face what she thought of either, or whether she was surprised. She came forward with long, swift strides. "Who has awaked me? Who has broken the spell?" she asked. "I think it must have been me," said Diggory. "Can you imagine how he would have felt? This is the picture that's in the book. Look how tall she is compared to them." I'm thinking they would be a little frightened at this point. "You," said the queen, laying her hand on his shoulder, a white, beautiful hand, but Diggory could feel that it was strong as steel pincers. "You? But you are only a child, a common child. Anyone can see at a glance that you have no drop of royal or noble blood in your veins. How did such as you dare to enter this house?" "We've come from another world, by magic," said Polly, who thought it was high time the Queen took some notice of her as well as Diggory. "Is this true?" said the Queen, still looking at Diggory and not giving Polly even a glance. "Yes, it is," said he. The Queen put her other hand under his chin and forced it up so she could see his face better. Diggory tried to stare back, but he soon had to let his eyes drop. There was something about hers that overpowered him. After she had studied him for well over a minute, which that's a long time to study someone's face, she let go of his chin and said, "You are no magician. The mark of it is not on you. You must be only the servant of a magician. It isn't on another's magic that you have traveled here." "It was my Uncle Andrew," said Diggory. At the moment, not in the room itself, but from somewhere very close, there came first a rumbling, then a creeping, then a creaking, and then a roar of falling masonry, and the floor shook again. "There is great peril here," said the Queen. "The whole palace is breaking up. If we are not out of it in a few minutes, we shall be buried under the ruin." She spoke as calmly as if she had been merely mentioning the time of day. I didn't read that very calmly, did I? I read it as if it was something to be worried about. "Come," she added, and held out a hand to each of the children. Polly, who was disliking the Queen, and feeling rather sulky, would not have let her hand be taken if she could have helped it. But though the Queen spoke so calmly, her movements were as quick as thought. Before Polly knew what was happening, her left hand had been caught in a hand so much larger and stronger than her own that she could do nothing about it. "This is a terrible woman," thought Polly. "She's strong enough to break my arm with one twist, and now she's got my left hand. I can't even get at my yellow ring." And do you remember the yellow ring and the green ring, and which one does what? Think about that right now. See if you can tell me just to the screen. What does the yellow ring do? Because this is important for us to be able to check for our understanding and our remembering of the story. Did you remember? If I tried to stretch across and get my right hand into my left pocket, I mightn't be able to reach it before she asked me what I was doing. Whatever happens, we mustn't let her know about the rings. I agree with Polly, don't you? I do hope Diggory has the sense to keep his mouth shut. I wish I could get a word alone with him. These are all things that Polly's thinking. She's not saying them out loud. The Queen led them out of the Hall of Images into a long corridor, and then through a whole maze of halls and stairs and courtyards. Again and again they heard parts of the great palace collapsing, sometimes quite close to them. Once a huge arch came thundering down only a moment after they had passed through it. The Queen was walking quickly. The children had to trot to keep up with her, but she showed no sign of fear. Just another day in the castle for her, but I guess not, because she's actually walking instead of being a statue sitting. Diggory thought, "She's wonderfully brave and strong. She's what I call a queen. I do hope she's going to tell us the story of this place." Do you notice how Diggory and Polly are kind of thinking different things? I wonder who's being the most discerning. I guess we shall see. You should make a prediction. She did tell them certain things as they went along. "This is the door to the dungeon," she would say, or "that passage leads to the principal torture chamber." Or "this was the old banqueting hall where my great-grandfather bade 700 nobles to a feast and killed them all before they had drunk their fill." They had rebellious thoughts. Do you think they're feeling a little worried? I'd be feeling a little worried now if I was them. They came at last into a hall larger and loftier than any they had yet seen. From its size and from the great doors at the far end, Diggory thought that now at last they must be coming to the main entrance. In this he was quite right. The doors were dead black, either ebony or some black metal which is not found in our world. They were fastened with great bars, most of them too high to reach and all too heavy to lift. He wondered how they would get out. I'm going to show you the pictures in the book. You can tell by this picture, if you look at it, you can tell she's walking quickly. Her hair is stringing behind her, and the girl's dress, Polly's dress, is kind of flinging out. And here is the door, much taller than the children. The queen let go of his hand and raised her arm. She drew herself up to her full height and stood rigid. Then she said something which they couldn't understand, but it sounded horrid, and made an action as if she were throwing something toward the door. And those high and heavy doors trembled for a second, as if they were made of silk fabric, and then crumbled away till there was nothing left of them but a heap of dust on the threshold. "Whew!" whistled Diggory. "Has your master magician, your uncle, power like mine?" asked the queen, firmly seizing Diggory's hand again. "But I shall know later. In the meantime, remember what you have seen. This is what happens to things and to people who stand in my way." Much more light than they had yet seen in that country was pouring in through the now empty doorway. And when the queen led them out through it, they were not surprised to find themselves in the open air. The wind that blew in their faces was cold, yet somehow still. They were looking from a high terrace, and there was a great landscape spread out below them. Low down and near the horizon hung a great red sun, far bigger than our sun. Diggory felt at once that it was also older than our sun, a sun near the end of its life, weary of looking down upon the world. That's my timer to tell me I have to stop now. And we'll come right back to it, okay, boys and girls? Keep your head in the story. I'll be right back.